This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jespersen.
Mr. Carney goes to Washington, and he may not come back with a deal right away, but a monumental summit, let's call it, a meeting in the Oval Office with Canada's Prime Minister and the President of the United States. It's being described as an historic meeting, and for many, many different reasons. This, the first time that the two leaders have met in their official capacities. You'll remember reports from President Donald Trump at a time when there was significant turmoil between Canada and the United States. This unfamiliar and intense economic relationship with, let's be real, conditions that still exist, but circumstances that Canadians, quite frankly, were not used to, like the booing of each other's anthems at sporting games. We're not used to an adversarial relationship with our neighbors to the south, at least off the ice. But the past few months have been uncomfortable, haven't they? So eyes across North America and probably around the world paying pretty close attention to that meeting, the March 6th meeting with Canada's Prime Minister and the President of the United States. We're going to get into what was said, what was discussed, and what was not, what was taken away from that meeting, and the current state of that relationship between these two extremely important trading partners. You know, there's been talk of billions and trillions of dollars that have been lost. Political leaders talking about this over the past number of months due to lags in meaningful legislation being passed or trade deals being updated to deliver exactly what nations want. But at the end of the day, it's the priorities of the American president that Canada's had to pivot on. And it's been impacting everyday folks like you, probably. Tariffs remain in place. There's still some hesitation from Canadians to travel to the U.S., and American tourism operators are feeling the pinch there. There's every reason to believe that both sides here, delegations from Canada and the U.S., should be motivated to get things done. In this episode, we're going to take a look at what happens if they do, what's the potential, and what happens if they don't. In just a second, a Real Talk Roundtable in studio featuring a cross-border perspective. We've got Americans in the house. We've got a resident of Canada in the house with his own interesting story, and we're excited to have you along for the ride. We'll be taking a look at the Real Talk live chat powered by Park Power, and we'll be getting into our email inbox to talk at ryanjespersen.com. Frankly, this episode doesn't happen without the support of Alberta's top online real estate school. You can find them at relo.ca. That's RELO.ca, where better real estate training starts. You're looking around you, you're watching your friends or family that are working in real estate set their own hours with unlimited earning potential, and you're going, gosh, I think I have every single tool in the trade that I need to forge a successful career myself. The best place to start is Relo. To get your real estate license, you got to take a couple of pre-licensing courses, a fundamentals course, a practical course. They've got an online team of experts to guide you through every step of the way. They're going to get you set. And then, of course, once you launch your career, they've got the advice for you as well to make sure you capture that momentum. Whether you're looking at the Alberta commercial or the Alberta residential real estate bundles, make sure you use the promo code Ryan100. That's Ryan100 to knock $100 off each of them when you get started today at relo.ca. We're going to meet a panel of three movers and shakers in just a quick second. But first, in case you missed it, here's a couple of highlights from the meeting that everybody's talking about. Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, American President Donald Trump, remarkably cordial, as a matter of fact, in the Oval Office. No talk about Canada's governor, no pats on the head from 47, but there was that recurring theme of Canada as the 51st state. And in probably the most pivotal moment of the meeting, Canada's Prime Minister speaking in a language that the American president can understand: real estate.
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign, last several months. It's not for sale, won't be for sale ever, but the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together. And we have done that in the past. And part of that, as the President just said, is with respect to our own security. And my government is committed for a step change in our investment in Canadian security and our partnership. And I'll say this as well, that the President has revitalized international security, revitalized NATO, and us playing our full weight in NATO, and that will be part of it.
And they have.
So there's kind of a vibe there, a positive vibe going on between the two. But if you're listening to the podcast and you haven't seen this interaction, what I think is particularly interesting is the President's body language, as maybe it sets in that Mark Carney is quite serious. And as he said, the owners of Canada, that's you, also quite serious about how we see our place in the world, how we see our relationship with the United States, how we see our future, our perpetual, perennial, forever future as a sovereign nation. But that didn't stop a journalist in the Oval Office from following up on that 51st state idea, and Canada's Prime Minister was clear.
First state, if Canadians don't want it, would you respect that?
Sure, I would. But this is not necessarily a one-day deal. This is over a period of time they have to make that decision. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may. If respectfully, Canadians' view on this is not going to change on the 51st state. Secondly, we are the largest client of the United States in the totality of all the goods. So we are the largest client of the United States. We have a tremendous auto sector between the two of us, and the changes that made have been helpful. 50% of a car that comes from Canada is American. That's not like anywhere else in the world. And to your question about is there one thing? No, this is a bigger discussion. There are much bigger forces involved, and this will take some time and some discussions, and that's why we're here, to have those discussions, and that is represented by who's sitting around the table.
See, the conflict is.
And then Trump goes on to speak in relatively reasonable terms. I know it feels strange if someone from the future came back, or better yet, someone from the past were able to vault forward and they would say, why is Jespersen complimenting the most powerful person on planet Earth for speaking in relatively normal or sane terms? It's because the landscape has completely changed, and this is a totally different reality. And it's obvious from that meeting that bad blood remains. Donald Trump has still not simmered down on his feelings around Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland, talking about the previous iteration of that Liberal Canadian government. But he praised Carney as a sharp economic mind. He talked about how Canadians are lucky to have a banker running the country. Carney thanking Trump for reaffirming the strength of the U.S.-Canada alliance, again referring to him as a transformative president. Could things be returning to normal? Now, they didn't strike a deal, but both recognized and reaffirmed that a revised trade deal is on the horizon. There's work to be done there. In the meantime, the tariffs remain. But at the end of the day, all reports, regardless of how you voted in the federal election, regardless of what your business interest is, what you do for a job, or what your investments look like, it feels like a positive first step. Let's find out what these three think about it. Marc Selvitelli is the president and CEO of NAIOP, responsible for leading the professional team. This is a global organization in collaboration with the board of directors to fulfill that organization's strategic goals. He's got his degree in political science from Pennsylvania State University, an active member of the American Society of Association Executives. Welcome to the show, Marc, and thanks for making time for us.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Where's home for you, by the way?
Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. Love it. Where all the action happens.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if we get ourselves an Oilers-Caps final.
Oh, I like that we're going to start right there. Good call. Big game for both of them in game one of round two last night. Alex Thomson's the North American chapter chair for NAIOP, the founder of Prevail Consultants as well, the chapter's representative on the NAIOP North American board, and the first ever Canadian chair-elect of NAIOP North America, serving as the association's chair in 2025. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you, Ryan. Great to be here.
Yeah, Edmonton home for you.
Exactly.
Another capital city.
Yeah, that's
Look
right.
at that. And rounding out our panel today, Eric Schmutz is Senior Director of Federal Affairs, nearly 30 years of experience working in D.C., in political campaigns as well as legislative and executive branches of the federal government, living in Alexandria, Virginia, another beautiful place to call home. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
What's one of the things you're paying close attention to in that meeting between the two global leaders?
I think just the tone of the conversation. You know, I think our president is interested in making a deal, and that's his history. And I think the fact that they were, cordial to each other is important.
It's kind of like a big first step, isn't it? Like, we talked about this decorum in the White House. Everybody remembers that sit down with Vladimir Zelensky that went completely sideways.
I was just going to bring that up. You can take a look at it in three ways here. He had the meeting with Zelensky. We all saw how that went. Then we see the British PM come over, and he really is just kissing the ring. And yet now, we've got Prime Minister Carney going down, and he really kind of navigated right down the middle there. And I think that works. And we've seen that work with President Trump before. You don't come in, don't be belligerent, but don't, just bow down and roll over either. And when you look at the respect that they had out of that meeting, I think it's a great first step for where we're going.
One of the reasons why we picked those clips in particular, I mean, and the whole meeting, I think, was relatively interesting. I mean, from start to finish, the exchange, but you saw Carney's game plan, which you referenced, and there were some gentle corrections, but important corrections, where I don't think he endeavored to make President Trump look foolish or look stupid, but when Trump said we barely do any business with Canada, and Carney gently points out that Canada is the Americans' biggest customer, moments like that are important. It's a way to clap back against what's obviously a negotiating strategy.
Yeah, I would agree. Look, we're the biggest trading partners. I think 22% of what Canada imports comes from the United States, and we bring in an awful lot of Canadian goods. They reference the autos, for instance. Those are moving back and forth across the border as part of USMCA. An agreement that we all negotiated on, to build upon NAFTA. That relationship has been incredibly important for years, and I think that we need each other. We've always been good, strong partners, and I think we want to see it. It's just right now, there's a little bump in the road, and every sibling has a bit of a rivalry. Every sibling has a little bit of a disagreement. Right now, I think that's probably a little bit about what you're seeing.
It's kind of like when the bigger sibling is like on their way through puberty, and they're a little bit taller and a little bit stronger and still getting used to the new body and pushing the little one around. That's what it feels like for us right now. Alex, you're the one that brought Eric and Marc in from D.C. and it's provided us an awesome opportunity to have Canadian and American perspectives around the table right now. But what were you looking for out of that meeting yesterday as somebody who lives and works in Canada?
Well, just what you said, actually, Ryan. I wanted to see a reset on the relationship that there'd been, been too fractious between our previous Prime Minister and the President, and so it was good to see Mr. Carney speaking to those issues. I think the other thing that's really, at the end of the day, we're a commercial real estate association. We exist in a political environment, but our job is to speak to commercial real estate issues, and so it was important for our members that people came back to the core issues to talk about the well-being of our two economies. We just published our economic impacts of real estate report, and we can chat about that a little bit more. But those are the things that really matter most to our members. So a good tone, as Eric said, a good start, as you and Marc referenced, and I think now we want to get into the business of how do we help business do well in both countries.
Yeah, I want to spend some time talking about that today. I want to loop in our live audience, most engaged talk audience in the country for our American visitors, and you'll see evidence of that in our live chat powered by Park Power. But Jillian says it's because the bar is just lower for Donald Trump. It's how we got there. Bunny Slipper says Carney schooled Trump with the facts. I see a lot of words like that, like he schooled him. The title of our episode today is Carney Torpedoes Trump's plan for the 51st state. And then there's a fair point here as well from a few folks that are pointing out that the transformative is not necessarily a compliment. They're just saying transformative is just simply a statement, but it is fair. He is a transformative president, no matter which way you slice it.
I think almost anybody's going to look at it this way. Look, he has upended the political norms in Washington, D.C. I mean, Eric and I see this on a daily basis. I mean, it is just a different city right now because he's challenged a lot of those norms. And I think you see that on the international stage as well, too, right now. And look, disruption has its positives and negatives, and it does transform things, but sometimes, it breaks a few glasses on the way. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now to a degree.
There's a Scottish comment in here in the chat, and Emily says, I loved Carney's face. It's not about you, Alex, but I thought maybe you can give us some cultural insights. Says, I loved Carney's face when Trump yammered on. Says, it reminded me of my Scottish father and my grandfather, who they would say, and was later reflected in the eulogy, don't suffer fools lightly. We've heard that around the world. Is that a particularly Scottish phrase, and does it apply here, do you think?
Well, I don't know if it's especially Scottish, but we used to say it a lot, or don't suffer fools gladly was another one too. The other Scottish phrase that comes to mind is "Hodge your wheesht," which means be quiet. The less you say, the better. And I think sometimes that's the best attitude, is not to get contentious as Mr. Zelensky did, but instead to try to, you've got to find points of alignment. And that's really what I think we need at this point, is there's going to be issues where we disagree. We've seen them. That's what led to people booing. But you can't carry on like that with your biggest partner. At some point, you have to resolve some of these things and move forward. So I'm hopeful we can find a way to move forward.
Cassandra says that was diplomacy at its finest. Transformational can be interpreted many different ways. Carney didn't mean it in the way that Trump thought, but still it stoked his ego enough to make him more compliant. Meantime, Tommy Temper, with a different perspective, says, woke, weak, Carney got stomped on by Trump. I must have missed that part of the meeting because I didn't see anybody getting stomped on. I also want to recognize that we're talking about your president here. When we're talking about how we suffer fools, when we're talking about the orange Cheeto, when we're talking about all the pejoratives that Canadians are hurling at the White House right now, we're also talking about the most powerful nation on earth's head of state. We're talking about the commander-in-chief. As guys that are doing business, you're in the world of deal making as well. How are you getting used to this, and how are you adjusting as Americans working in D.C.?
That's a good question. It's definitely more. It's really hard to come up with an answer with that. I mean, they're set. We have progressed for the last probably 25 years in D.C. of hardening of lines. And I think with with the ratios in the House and the Senate now, that's more difficult than it's been in the past. But those lines are harder. I think the president has much more influence over the Republican Party than probably any president has had over their party in the past previously. Which is, considering his margins are really probably to his benefit.
Yeah, I would just add, I think you can take a look at how it stands in politics in the U.S. right now and actually see a very similar parallel to Canada. Let's take a look at the federal elections just a few weeks ago. We had about, 47% for the Liberals and about 2% less for the Conservatives. I mean, it was really a narrow victory, narrower than what the polls were saying. And I think it continues to reflect, regardless of what side of the border you're on, the politics are really hard lines on either side. And even just some of the comments that you've been talking about and reflecting upon from your listeners, I think show that too. This isn't the rhetoric of, let's try to find a way to make this work. It's the rhetoric of, I'm going to bang my pots and pans, and I'm going to bang them louder than you, and you're just going to have to deal with it, and to hell with you. And that's really what we're seeing, I think, a lot of right now. And that is, you could debate where this comes from, social media and others. We all get just our really narrow news sources. But it also means I think we've narrowed our vision. And I think that's on both sides. And the compromise has to work out. It's ultimately what politics is, compromise.
How closely are people in D.C. paying attention to the results of the Canadian election, relatively speaking?
Well, I'm going to separate this. Inside of D.C., probably a lot, because this is what we live on, is the politics side of things. Outside of the Beltway, probably not all that much, with the exception of the northern border states where, that are highly dependent upon the business between both the countries. Michigan, New York, Washington State, major ports of entry. Look, they're watching this closely.
Alex, how about you and your colleagues and obviously NAIOP representatives and members from across the country? These are people in the business of building and managing commercial real estate, affordable multifamily housing developments, right? We'll get into the mandate of NAIOP in a while, but obviously I would imagine particular policy points were an area of probably laser focus through the campaign. But how about the election results generally speaking? What hung in the balance, so to speak, on the 28th of April?
Well, I think our members are always concerned about certainty, because one of the things people overlook with commercial real estate is that our business is a decades-long business. Even just getting entitlements to build something can take upwards of 18 months. Building the project itself can take 3 or 4 years. I mean, you look at ICE District around us here, it's been ongoing for a long time. So certainty is always important to our members, and I think that people were hopeful that we would see a continued support from the government on housing, because that's an issue, whether multifamily or single unit housing. I think our members are also concerned on both sides of the border actually around about regulatory burden. There's been a lot of additional process brought into the development pipeline over the last number of years that slowed things down. So I think we're hopeful with going forward that we can see more clarity.
In layperson's terms, can you give me an example for like the every person on what sort of a regulatory requirement would be perceived as a burden, like something that might be seen as sort of extraneous or redundant?
Yeah, I would say, one example, in some jurisdictions in North America, they have a planner as an example. If they say that the project conforms to the city's plan, that's good enough. Other jurisdictions make a planner on their team go and read the same document and see if they agree. It's just a duplication of work without any real benefit to the resident or to the city. So that would be one example that comes to mind right away.
Interesting comment here from Cactus Sheriff, who's in the chat, and who says there's no moving forward with the United States, there's moving on. As Americans, you don't want to hear that, right?
I'll say it as an American, no. I mean, I look at the relationship, again, that our countries have had and the investment in business on both sides. There's a real interdependence on the economies in each country. I'll give you a great example, just looking at it from a commercial real estate perspective. Canada is the biggest foreign investor in U.S. commercial real estate.
Is that right?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's over $700 billion are invested from Canada in the U.S. into commercial real estate. That's a big source of capital. Commercial real estate is not a cheap endeavor, We need that money, and it's highly dependent to keep our industry flourishing and a lot of others. So that's one small example, but I think looking at it from a pure business perspective and really just looking from it as a pragmatic perspective, we need each other.
So NAIOP operates across the continent, though, and you've got members. I mean, to state the obvious, you've got members in red states and you got members in blue states. In so many ways as there's members in, we don't really refer to them this way, but red provinces and blue provinces. Although we might as well refer to it that way, because I'm not sure if you guys are, but we've kind of evolved to what appears to be a two-party system up here in Canada for the foreseeable future anyway.
Yeah.
But how does that affect the dynamic or decisions or a collective perspective on policy or on sort of, the MO moving forward?
Yeah, look, I think it's easy to put everything in a nice little neat columns: red state, blue state, red province, blue province. I don't know what color the NDP used to have.
Orange.
Yeah. Okay. It's an easy thing to do, but really, again, policy solutions are born of compromise. And, when I look at, our members, we've got members on all ends of the political spectrum. And you're going to need that. I mean, NAIOP, look, we support candidates on all sides, whether they're liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, because it's not so neat just to say that every issue, whether it's auto manufacturing, the development of commercial real estate, the making of spatulas, whatever it is, this is really just comes down to you've got to find a way to make it work. And it's not simple to put it in one easy bucket.
Garth's in our chat, and I mean, obviously, it appears that I don't know if I want to say a Trump supporter, but a conservative supporter for sure. Says though, at the end of the day, I don't want Mark Carney to fail, because if he fails like Trudeau, then we're done for. at some point, you got to put aside, I suppose, when you're talking about business, whether you're talking about political or geographical relationships, what have you, sometimes it makes sense, though I may be stating the obvious, to put aside political allegiances and recognize what's good for one Canadian is typically, in this context, economically and otherwise, going to be good for most Canadians, going to be good for North America, going to be good for global trade, right? Is it time to sort of coming out of an election, maybe sort of remind ourselves of that?
I definitely think so. We're not aligned. We're not, Democrats for development or Republicans for refurbishment or whatever alliteration you want to come up with to try to pigeonhole us. At the end of the day, we want commercial real estate to do well, and where you're going to find good policy solutions is usually with a bit of compromise, because ideology tends to simplify things, and life's usually more complex than that. In the United States last year, our members contributed $2.5 trillion to GDP. That's from either new commercial development or the existing operations of commercial real estate. In Canada, we're just working on the new stats for this year, but it looks like in just the last 3 years, we've had about a 20% increase in the GDP contribution from commercial real estate operations. So these are huge numbers. Understanding that and looking beyond maybe some of the simple headlines to find real answers, that's where we need to get to as two countries.
In the live chat powered by Park Power, get exclusive discounts on internet, electricity, and natural gas at parkpower.ca/realtalk. Marianne says Canadians need proof that international trade agreements aren't going to be ripped up over false claims of security issues, and trust is earned. Aaron says narratives require that we buy into them. Don't buy into them. They are a creature of want. We've got a whole bunch of comments coming on here. Keep them coming. We're going to get to more of what you have to say, Real Talkers, as we continue this conversation. When we come back, though, we talk about these policy solutions. What are they? Ultimately, what would we love to see materialize through all of this? We'll get the expert perspective and what you have to say. If you're listening to this later on the podcast, you can always send us an email to talk@ryanjespersen.com or leave a comment on our YouTube episode. Right now, I want to make sure that Northwest Film Fest is on your radar. This opens May 8th. This is a big deal coming right up. This is Canada's longest running nonfiction documentary festival, and they're going to be premiering some of the hottest films this year, including from Sundance and South by Southwest, but opening night's going to be a big one. Northwest Film Fest blasting the roof off of the Garneau Cinema with a huge double feature Brit-pop extravaganza to kick the whole thing off. It's Blur to the end and Blur live at Wembley Stadium, the highly anticipated Alberta premiere with 4-star reviews across the board. These two incredible films are the next best thing to being on the road with the band and then sitting in the front row for their incredible live show. We're also going to have an opportunity to check out the Alberta premiere of The Librarians. That's executive producer Sarah Jessica Parker and Sally, the story of astronaut Sally Ride, who became the first American woman to blast off into space. Incredible film, incredible programming. You can learn more at northwestfest.ca, and make sure you catch our episode tomorrow here on Real Talk. That's the 8th of March. We'll open with the Premier of Alberta in studio, Danielle Smith, and then a Northwest Film Fest roundtable featuring the 3 finalists for the City of Edmonton Film Prize. That's right, the Edmonton Film Prize finalists are going to be joining us on the heels of our interview, our exclusive one-on-one with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. That's coming up on the next episode of the show. I also want to make sure if you're working in the oil and gas or energy industry, if hydrocarbons are on your radar, if solar is your thing, if you want to try and prompt more conversation on nuclear or geothermal, whatever it is, there's a fit for you at the 2025 Nisku Energy Show, May 14th and 15th. We're going to be talking about local innovation and collaboration, expertise and advancements shaping this province's future. I'm proud to be hosting it. That's May 14th and 15th at the stunning Silent Ice Sports and Entertainment Center. This is produced by the Leduc, Nisku, and Wetaskiwin Region Chambers. You can get your tickets to the 2025 Nisku Energy Show by visiting yourchamber.ca. If all this talk about real estate, commerce, business, international relations, Political science is what floats your boat, and you're ready to kickstart your career. You're going to want to take 2 minutes to check out athabascau.ca. That's world-class accredited online degrees and courses designed so you can complete your Athabasca University education whenever and wherever it works for you. It could be on-demand professional development. It could be a flexible grad program, maybe an MBA. Online courses, more than 850 of them in a variety of subject areas. You can get that ball rolling today at athabascau.ca. And I want to make sure that UCAN Youth Services is on your radar. This is a remarkable nonprofit charitable organization that Real Talk is proud to be partnering with through 2025. In particular, I want to make sure you know about their relentless outreach workers. This is a team that's interacting on a sometimes daily basis with the top 50 young people known to police. This is a gut punch of a list. This is not a list you want to be on. These are the 12 to 17-year-olds that are most interacting with the legal system, with the justice system. But UCAN's Youth Services outreach workers stop at nothing to empower these young people to make positive, healthy, and life-changing decisions. If you know a young person that would really benefit from connecting with UCAN, if you're looking for somewhere to direct a donation or maybe a portion of your estate, or if you're an employer hiring entry-level positions, consider a partnership with UCAN. You'll find them online today at ucan.ca. We're hanging out with Eric Schmutz, Senior Director of Federal Affairs at NAIOP, in town from Washington, D.C., alongside Marc Selvitelli, President and CEO of NAIOP, Alex Thomson, rounding off our round table, the North American chapter chair with NAIOP as well. When we talk about policy solutions, why don't we start with the Canadian perspective first? This relationship with Canada and the U.S., obviously your area of expertise, real estate and development, but bigger picture, economic development, the reality. What sort of policy decisions are you hoping to see reached, agreements between these two nations?
Well, maybe I'll start more local if that's okay, and then talk at larger scale. I would say, our NAIOP chapter in Calgary, I know you've got a big Calgary audience, was actually a North America leader in seeing office space converted into multi-residential space. They were able to align with the city of Calgary on that, a very effective program that's actually been copied by some of our NAIOP chapters across North America.
So Calgary was among the first?
Among the first, and among the leaders too, the thought leader on that as well as an action leader. We've seen great results with that. I believe the city of Calgary is probably going to commit to a second round of work in that area. So that's a great example where our members and levels of government have been able to come together and work. I would say our business depends on certainty, so having some assurance over what's going to happen on some of these programs will be important. Maybe another policy initiative going over onto the U.S. side. We've seen, Marc mentioned already, I think the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. We're hopeful that our U.S. government is going to see the value that things like carried interest actually contributes to the economy. That's one of the policy vehicles that allows private developers to take risk on their projects and get compensated on equity. It's a little bit of a nuanced issue, but it's an important one to our members, and it has a big economic impact.
We got, by the way, Calgary mayoral candidate Jeremy Farkas in the chat right now participating. Let me ask you this. You talked about thought leadership in Calgary, and what I'm assuming you mean by that is an openness or maybe a recognition of the impetus to maybe remove some of the barriers, perceived legislative or otherwise, that would stand in the way of either private investors or publicly traded companies, entities making significant investments in transforming some of these spaces, right? If you're talking about, for example, office space to residential space, it's going to take big investments.
Big investment, and I think the other thing is going to take collaboration. That's what worked well in Calgary. People didn't come in with a fully formed solution and say, now go and do what I say. People didn't come back and just resist it because it wasn't their idea. I was in Colorado last week. We had a great engagement with the city of Thornton in Colorado. They had asked NAIOP to put forward some development ideas for a large site in that city. They had an idea of what they wanted it to be. They had some principles they could articulate, but it wasn't a methodology that we were forced to implement. And so it left lots of room for creativity. In fact, we turned it into a case study contest between two different universities. So that's the sort of thought leadership that we need across North America is people being willing to sit down with one another, hear each other's perspective, and then formulate a policy.
Yeah, let me jump in on that because I think there's an important thing here. This goes back to, I think, the overall theme of what we've been talking about today. You need compromise. And, take a look at what we had here. And Calgary is the ultimate example of this. You have a lot of office space on the market. It's not paying the taxes. Office values are depressed. You've got a housing crisis. So you have a lot of folks that are unhoused or underhoused. And what you saw was, I think, a great example of when citizens and business and government can come together, actually build that triangle and find an actual solution to multiple problems. I mean, is it the ultimate end-all be-all solution? Maybe not, but it was, I think, a good example of creativity that can happen when all parties put aside their, I'm just going to stick my feet in the sand and I'm not moving, and find a way to come to a good solution.
Eric, when we introduced you, I mentioned that you've got like 30 plus years of experience. I'm not trying to make you feel old, by the way, either. I know we're all at this stage in life. All of a sudden, high school was decades ago. I'm there with you. But working in D.C. and on political campaigns, legislative, executive branches of the federal government, I think people will look right now and for example, that this, whatever the trade agreement's going to look like with the United States or the tariffs factoring in, et cetera, and people will say, oh, it's Donald Trump. It's a whole new style of governance. He's upended political norms and the like, but there's also been changes globally. There's also been changes around the world in things like environmental regulations and in deployment of international capital and the like. How much understanding is there that the change in global dynamics is maybe not as much of an influence in Canada-U.S. relationships, but generally speaking for nations all around the world that are participating in trade and commerce? It's different than it was 30 years ago, to say the least.
Oh, yeah, it's more complicated, of course, when you're coming up with regulations or how, you see something. We notice this in the U.S. on state issues, like an idea will manifest somewhere and sort of progress through. I think one of the concerns that you see with kind of conservatives in the U.S. is that some bad ideas in the EU are coming into the U.S. from the other, from the Democratic side. I think that's sort of the resistance that you see. Ultimately, though, I mean, we've talked about the need for compromise. I think that we all get there. These agreements will get through, because they have to. But they'll have deaths a couple times, and everything will look like this is the end, and then it just happens. I think that's the big difference with this administration than before. The president is communicating, and the person communicating every day. A lot of presidents didn't allow their cabinets to do that, so you didn't have one focal point.
I haven't seen any other presidents tweeting out AI-generated images of them as the Pope.
I've never seen another president tweet.
That's period.
Yeah, when I worked for President Bush, they took his phone away.
Is that right? Actually,
he never carried a cell phone. Everything was communicated through someone else. So this being the person communicating is definitely different.
Was that because there was a concern that President Bush would did Twitter even exist when Bush was president? I'm trying to remember. I think you came in. No, I think it came in after, but I think it was just you had email through it. I just think that there was concern really at that time on hackers to his phone and his own privacy, but he didn't have an email. I think President Obama, late in his second term, started to get where he had an email. They originally took it away from him in the first term as well. That sounds like a dream come true to me, to have somebody take my phone and take away my email.
Well, politics is often messaging, right? I mean, that's really kind of a big part of it. And, here I think, getting back to the thing of disruption, this is what you see now. The president is, what's on his mind is coming out in a tweet. And I think there's a big difference between the first term of Donald Trump and the second term, in that the first term, he tweets something out and everybody would just, oh my God, I can't believe he said this, or what's going to happen here. Now it's taken with a little bit more salt of, oh, okay, is he going to feel this way tomorrow? Or is this just, I woke up, had a bad dream, and this is the first thing that comes out?
I want to come back to your question too about global trade and how that affects the reality that we all live into. Recently I was in California. I got the chance to hear from one of the economists from that state. He mentioned that Alibaba's equivalent of Prime Day is 5 times larger than Amazon's Prime Day.
Is that right?
5 times.
Out of China.
28% of the third-party logistics warehouse deals done in California last year were done by Chinese logistics companies. So the global trade issue is an enormous one. And I shouldn't even say issue. The reality of global trade is an enormous one for everybody. It affects our members. It affects the way that you and I live our lives, even where the things that we think we buy locally are often being sourced from outside. So, that's become an important part of the way that all of us live our lives. It's the way we retail, it's the way that we warehouse, and so disruption to that has a much wider effect than people might immediately think.
I'm going to get back to the chat, and these are just going to sound random because I'm just picking them at random, but this is how they're coming in contributions to this conversation. Powered by Park Power, Tracy says Canada's economy did as well as could be expected post-COVID-19, public health restrictions, pretty good recovery with relatively minimal unemployment. Jeremy Farkas, by the way, back in. He wants to be Calgary's next mayor. This is for some context for our American guests. Kind of the conservative voice on Calgary's council, lost a mayoral race, went to do some periods of self-reflection, community advocacy, summited like more mountains than anybody could remember, and then now he's back in the mix. He wants to be mayor again. So there's the context. He says, Calgary must lead at the center of a strong and united Team Canada. While the federal and provincial governments navigate their responses, local governments can move faster. He says thinking nationally, acting, or I guess you could even say thinking internationally, acting locally will make a difference, says Calgary's operating budget rivals Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut combined. You're nodding.
Yes, we see that all the time. We're an international organization. We have 55 chapters in the 2 different countries, 21,000 members, but it's the ability to act locally and have our leaders locally identify what matters that's really been a hallmark of NAIOP success over the decades. I think that local leadership and responsiveness can be really important. And going back to something Mark said earlier, that when we collaborate together, when we're willing to share ideas, pick up best practices, Eric talked about sometimes people are picking up ideas from elsewhere that don't work well in a local context. But when you can pick up an idea and share it among members as we do, share it among policymakers as we endeavour to do every day as well, that's a really powerful contribution to what's going on in Canada and in the United States.
And he went on, by the way, and said Calgary must lead by pushing for the removal. And I'll sub in, not just Calgary, obviously the removal of interprovincial trade barriers. Did the two of you hear Mark Carney in his victory speech on election night just slipped in this one line where he said free trade in Canada by Canada Day. Just this one line, and everybody kind of went, whoa. Like, that's a pretty big promise, actually, to eliminate these interprovincial trade barriers. I'm sure they exist in the United States as well, between states, by July 1st. But he says you got to remove these. They cost our economy billions. They limit growth. Cities can help. We must eliminate outdated regulations, particularly limiting new homes that hold back small businesses and prevent them from expanding. Is there interstate trade barriers that operate or interfere in the same way?
Not nearly like what we're seeing up here in the
Really?
provinces. There may be certain liquor control laws that come into place. You can't get wine from certain areas, but I don't think it is nearly as strong as you see with some of the barriers that are here between the provinces. Admittedly, when I heard the PM say that on his victory speech, it gave me pause. And maybe just because I'm a dork in politics and love to watch this stuff, I was listening to what the PM said, and I thought, I didn't even realize they had interprovincial trade barriers.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's a really high hurdle to clear. The fact that you have something internally you have to deal with, and then you've also got an external audience too. I mean, that's a challenging environment for business to operate in.
A huge element. I mean, the Trump factor. Trump was the ballot box question in this election, to say the least. But there were other serious issues that Canadians are demanding action on, and affordable housing and the housing crunch. Housing inventory is a big one of that. Scarlett's in our live chat. She says, I'll tell you what we need to know about housing. How can we incentivize or entice commercial developers to really dig in on attainable and affordable housing? Well, let's get into that.
Well, there's probably a couple of routes to go there. One is that the slowdown in people actually being able to build. So in Toronto, I think the average entitlement period to get to start a multifamily project is about 18 months. Here in Alberta, it's much less. City of Edmonton, together with NAIOP, working to make it even less. We're hoping to get that down to 40 days, which would be a huge difference compared to 18 months in other jurisdictions. So letting people build and removing some of the barriers, I think the supply side solution will be really important. I think we've seen the government commit so far to policy around supporting affordable housing. We are hopeful that the Prime Minister continues with what he said, which is to provide public support for private development rather than try to socialize public housing. I think that is a difficult program. I don't think people are set up to do it. And we've got a whole development community that's itching to go. And if you speak to our members in BC and Ontario in particular, they'll say they've got way more projects than they've got permits. And if we could get rid of that barrier, we'd have a lot of housing coming out of the pipe pretty quick.
What's the biggest impact on the same or similar conversation in the U.S.?
It's actually very similar. I would say that the regulatory barriers are largely the biggest problem that get into it. You know, one of the things that, you know, Alex just mentioned, it takes about 18 months in Toronto. But that means you've got a developer holding onto a land, paying taxes already on this land. And really what you need, there isn't a developer out there that objects to building more affordable housing. You know, I mean, it's a common misperception that, you know, everybody just wants to run around like the Monopoly guy with tons of sacks of money and that's it. The reality is look, we all realize that vibrant communities are what make us tick. Affordable housing is part of that. But the barriers that are there, particularly on the regulatory front, make it almost impossible to build these structures. It just even break even. And I've yet to see anybody that wants to go into business and say, well, I'm going to lose money. They're not even going to be able to build anything. I think it's the same issue on both sides of the border. It is making sure that we provide the environment to build and make it so that we can build affordably to provide that housing that is so needed throughout North America.
As we wrap our roundtables, I want to first of all thank the three of you for making time for us today. I know you've got a lot to get to this afternoon, but we wanted to make sure we had this kind of look at us bringing American and Canadian representatives to the table.
See, it's easy.
It's easy. I don't see what's so difficult about this, but we often ask our panelists to leave the audience with a charge or a challenge or something to reflect on or something to think about in the context of what we're talking about. Mr. Carney goes to Washington in the context of this relationship with Canada. Johnny, you like that one?
I'd watch that movie.
Thanks. I'm working on it. I'm just planting seeds and just watering them through the conversation. But something to think about, something to walk with. And I want to start with our delegates from D.C. Eric, what's something that you think this largely Canadian audience should be thinking about this relationship, about commerce, about the economy, and about the bigger picture, Canada and the U.S. moving forward?
Well, I think one of your commenters said something about, you know, leave it behind and walk away. You have to remember that we are connected, not just physically, but economically. These products are coming back and forth. We get a significant amount of energy, that oil and gas that comes from here in Alberta, comes right down through the center part of the United States. I actually grew up about 5 miles from the Keystone Pipeline that goes in that part of the country.
Oh, is that right?
So it's, you know, we are tied together, and I just think you have to continue to remember that and not worry about winning the next argument.
Yeah, I think the PM said it well in the meeting with President Trump yesterday, and that is, you know, look, this is a big relationship. It's a big project. And, you know, one thing to keep in mind here in relation to all the discussion that's going on, we've heard so much about globalization, and it's true. We are interconnected around the world. But you can look at it and say there's really three zones. There's a Eurozone, there's Asia, and there's North America. Ultimately, you know, we are our best trading partners between the U.S. and Canada. And I think both countries thrive and continue to perform at their best when we work together, whether that's on energy, whether it is on agriculture, on so many issues. We're interconnected and we are our best customers. You know, like I said, this is maybe a little bit of a sibling spat, but like most sibling spats, I think we'll get past this. It's just, you know, we've got to discuss, but I think cooler heads will ultimately prevail because, well, we want to be successful.
And I think that we can all acknowledge that the worse it gets for everybody, right?
100%.
Like, it's there was that comment from Garth earlier in our chat where he basically said, like, he's not in a position. Mark Carney may not have been his first choice for prime minister, but he's not about to cheer against his country. And I think that's a position that a lot of people find themselves in, Alex.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, as far as a point of advice, I shared with our NAIOP members at the end of last year, with no idea just how much turmoil we were going to head into, that take charge of the things that you can control. And I think that advice still stands. As Canadians, we don't get to vote in the American elections. It's not up to us how they choose to govern their country, but we do have the ability to have influence here. We have good ability to get involved with our municipal officials and talk about housing in Edmonton and what we can do. We've got the ability to talk to the province about their work on removing inter-provincial trade barriers, and we've got the ability to do that to our federal government also. And I think that's really the best thing that we can do as Canadians, is commit to being good Canadians, get involved with what's happening here in our country and see what we can make a difference.
Sometimes I lie and I wrap a panel and then I circle back because there's another question, and that's exactly what's happening here. I hope you're both okay. But Gilles is throwing a couple high and inside here. Baseball reference for our American guests. I want to speak in a language you can both understand. And Gilles basically says, number one, he says he feels sorry for the both of you having to be so careful about what you say on a Canadian talk show for fear of crossing the border back into the United States. There is an element of seriousness where some business travelers in general, Canadians, have been advised to remove social media apps from their phones, to essentially wipe their data, wipe their phones before traveling to the States. Is that something, especially in high-profile positions like the two of you hold, that is actually on your radar? I mean, you're laughing, but is that on your radar?
Look, you think about it. I mean, we do business across the border, and anytime there's hesitation on either side, that makes you pause. Look, I had an organization of 22,000 members, of which they're on both sides of the borders. And if any of our members are hesitant to cross the border in either way, that's not good for business. It's not good for our relationship. So yeah, it gives me pause about that. But look, maybe I'm just a glass half full guy. I always say things are tip top, but I do think ultimately we'll find the way to get past this. But look, it is concerning when we have to worry about that. Everybody in Canada, well, I can't speak for everybody. I feel like most people in Canada know that we'll get past this. It's just most people feel like it's going to take 3.5 years. That's the part that I think people are having a hard time reconciling with. And that's assuming that Barron is not the next president of the United States after this.
One of the things that we have to deal with as NAIOP is that we're across the whole country. We're across the United States. So we have members who are will have voted for President Trump. We'll have people who will have voted for Harris. And so, it's our job really to ensure that we represent our members in all of those perspectives. And where we can agree is we want the U.S. to do well, we want Canada to do well, and we want our communities to do well, all of which it happens best when we let our commercial real estate developers get on with what we're trying to do.
Here's Jill's second pitch, by the way, and it's. I mean, I'll put it to you in closing. He says, I wonder if our guest would believe that landowners not developing should be paying more property taxes, like full value versus land value, for sitting on empty land. Bit of a loaded question right at the end.
It is a loaded question, but it's a good question. We've heard this narrative from the city of Edmonton a lot of the time. All these parking lots are just sitting there because people won't build. Sure, that's because they can't build it profitably. And I would say sometimes the zoning has compelled people to build in a form that the market doesn't want to absorb. So Jill's question is an excellent question. If there was more freedom in the zoning bylaw to allow people to build a variety of built forms, you'd probably see more development. When people are compelled to do something, they don't like it.
That is Alex Thomson, North American Chapter Chair out of NAIOP and a proud Edmontonian. Has been joined by Eric Schmutz and Marc Selvitelli, joining us from Washington, D.C., Senior Leadership with NAIOP. You can learn more about this Commercial Real Estate Development Association at NAIOP.org. We'll punch that link into the show notes on the podcast and on YouTube. And, of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. To talk at RyanJespersen.com. Thanks for making time for us as part of your Alberta visit. We appreciate it.
That was great to have us. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Great to see you both, and thanks for making it happen, Alex.
Thank you.
Shout out to you and your team. This conversation has been made possible with incredible Real Talk partners like the team at North Road Investment Council. On this show, we don't shy away from the big questions, and when it comes to your retirement, some of these questions, well, they can feel pretty persistent, right? Do I have enough to retire, or am I fooling myself? Should I take my CPP out early, or should I wait? How do I make sure I don't run out of money if I'm lucky enough to live into my 90s? And maybe in the context of the conversation we just had with those three, how do I protect my savings from taxes, inflation, or a market crash? If these are the questions that are keeping you up at night, or if you don't even know which questions to ask, then it's time to talk to the team at North Road Investment Counsel. Their certified financial planners and chartered financial analysts can answer your biggest retirement and financial planning questions. They're independent fiduciaries who pay a per-hour fee, not through commissions paid by selling you investment products. So there's no fluff. There's no pressure, just clear advice and strategies that make perfect sense. You can visit them online today at northroadic.com to book an appointment and get the answers to your burning questions. Hey, have you checked out Kubi Renewable Energy's Instagram lately? I love their thought. They got such a talented team out there that takes us onto the rooftops and lets us see the amazing work that the Solar by Kubi team is doing this time of year. I mean, look at these photos. These are the cleanest installs you ever did see. Clean energy built by people who care. The Kubi team shows up every single day to bring solar to life safely, skillfully, and sustainably. You can check them out online, and you'll find job postings at kubi.ca. Click on the solar link and then careers. Don't forget, you can also always get a free solar quote. Again, that's on their website, kubi.ca. Man, it's beautiful weather this time of year, and the Ranch Golf and Country Club is taking the reservations right now. The Ranch is looking to book your foursome out there. This is Alberta's top public course all the way through. And of course, with more than 120 golf tournaments annually, nobody's doing more tournaments than the Ranch. Well, why does that matter to you? If you're in charge of booking the tournaments for your nonprofit, your organization or agency, you're going to want to get in touch with the team at the Ranch. Nobody does it better with the best advice on marketing, on promo, on menu, on whole activations. We work with them on our Real Talk Golf Classic. That's coming up on the 19th of June. And of course, we're proud to partner with the Ranch through this golf season. You can check out more on their website. That's theranchgolf.com. And we want to make sure if your spring into summer is going to include an investment in your home, custom closets, storage solutions, maybe a brand new reinvention of your garage, you gotta talk to California Closets. Nobody can make more out of your space with custom organizational systems. And the best part about it, it's a Canadian-owned and operating business manufacturing all of those custom installations right here in Alberta. The free consultation starts today on their website, californiaclosets.ca. And don't forget, all of their work guaranteed for life. They can work with any space, any budget. It's californiaclosets.ca. Man, a ton of comments here on that meeting in the Oval Office with President Donald Trump and Mark Carney. The technical producer of this show, John Hicks, approaches these conversations through a very unique lens. John, you shared with us before your roots in Florida, your upbringing in Ontario, your professional career in BC and Alberta. So you see this through a number of different lenses. What did you make of the body language? What did you make of the comments, the back and forth yesterday between these two leaders?
Florida man weighs in on Trump Carney meeting. That's the headline right
If
here.
you were a true Florida man, you would just say that the Donald nailed it and owned his woke ass.
Well, if I was a true Florida man, I'd be naked right now on the podcast and drinking. I thought it was a great meeting. You know, the naysayers will say, you know, he bowed to Trump, he did this, he did that. Canadians didn't elect Carney to go in there and wrangle a bull and stir up the chicken coop and get a war started. What he did was the exact playbook that you need to do to Trump. You're never going to win an argument with Trump. He's just going to keep blurting out non-factual things until he gets what he wants. He's always going to get the last word. Carney did what I wanted him to go in there and do as well. As a Canadian who wanted someone calm to go in there, he remained calm. I wanted him to reiterate our non-negotiables. He did that. I wanted him to fact check. He did that. But at the same time, I wanted him to shut up and listen. Here's the problem with Zelensky. This is why Zelensky got torn apart by Trump and J.D. Vance. He shoots from the hip when he gets emotional. And he interrupts Trump. Trump does not like being interrupted. He does not like people to get emotional and angry with him. What did Carney do? He remained calm. He said Canada's not for sale. He fact-checked Trump on the fact that, unfortunately, Canada is America's largest client. He did everything he was supposed to. And the naysayers will say this is weak, this is that. It's not. It's a negotiator negotiating a hostage situation, which is this guy was FBI. He was in there. I wish I could name the guy with the sunglasses from that show where, and he puts on the glasses.
Are you talking about David? Was it David Caruso from CSI?
David Caruso vibes the whole time. Stay calm, one-liners, throw on the sunglasses, get on a plane back to Canada.
I miss CSI. That was like back in the day. That was a top show, and you always knew the one-liner was coming. The sunglasses were going on, the one-liner was coming, and he nailed it every single time.
He'd come into a room, and he'd
CSI.
see a body on the ground, and let's say there's too much chalk on the outline.
Yeah.
And he's like, I guess I'll chalk this up to overexertion.
Did you just make that up right now?
I'm just trying to think. He always
had
a
one-liner. Did you literally
one-liner.
just make
He
that up
always had
right
a
now?
one-liner.
John, that is one of the most underrated Real Talk performances of all time.
It wasn't that great.
JJ in the chat says Prime Minister Carney in D.C. was one of the most Canadian-esque. He says this is the most Canadian-esque footage that we'll ever see. Cool, calm, collected, minimal eye rolls. No name calling, making the counterpart feel important. JJ says, all while knowing they're dumb as shit. Here's the thing.
You got to be quiet and you got to stroke the ego and you got to calmly present what your non-negotiables are, and you just got to sit there. And the whole thing is a play. It's a facade. It's a wizzy-wazzy. It's a whoozy.
But that's
it's
what
not
they
real.
do. That's what they do.
Meeting with Trump is not real.
It's what we elect them to do.
And he did the best he could, and that's what you have to do with Trump. But man, how sideways could this have gone if he barked in and interrupted and said elbows up and all these things? That's not what we wanted. We wanted someone to calm this fire.
And that's what I loved about this roundtable is like to have the CEO of NAIOP, by the way, out of DC in the Real Talk studio, a bit of a big deal. But they're talking about everybody wants this to succeed. Nobody wants this to fail. I was watching last night, and by the way, we're talking about Victory in Europe Day in just a sec, so I'll keep my comments here brief and limited. But for context, some of you may hear this 6 months or a year after we do this show, but hours before we're recording this episode, the Edmonton Oilers visited Sin City for Game 1 of Round 2 of the National Hockey League Stanley Cup playoffs. It's Oilers Vegas to go to the Western Conference Final, and I found myself still a little bit twitchy when they started singing the national anthems, and in particular when they started with "O Canada," obviously the visiting team. And part of me wondered, and I think maybe it's because half of the crowd, I think, was actually from Edmonton down there visiting, a friendly crowd to the Oilers. But I still wonder, oh gosh, I hope that the anthems aren't being booed. We talked about this on the show a lot. It was a period of time, and it was understandable for some. I mean, we litigated this on Real Talk. Do you boo the anthem? Do you not boo the anthem? Is it effective? How does it make you feel? How long will you boo the anthem, et cetera, et cetera? But for the most part, I think most people were uncomfortable with it when it was happening. And everybody wants to see that relationship be a healthy one. And so I also want to recognize, just on the outro of JJ's clip there, making him feel important, this, whatever, and then dumb as shit. Donald Trump is not stupid. Donald Trump may say stupid things. I mean, recognizing the Canadian hockey superstar Alexander Ovechkin last night was entertaining. But you always wonder, is he doing that on purpose? He's got different strategies than anybody else, but he's not stupid.
He's uninformed in a lot of areas.
But you don't become president of the United States by being stupid.
He's uninformed in a lot of areas, and I think he has trouble remembering stats correctly and what they adhere to. And he, overall, I think his expertise is like money, negotiations. He understands the economy to a degree, which is why I think this whole tariffs thing like is bullshit, because he knows it's not going to help. But overall, that meeting, I'm saying it right now, it's a hostage negotiation. You know, when the hostage negotiator's on the phone and he's like, hey, buddy, how can I help you? That's exactly how you play Donald Trump. And what do you see from Trump? man, his shoulders are relaxed. He's saying, Marc's a very nice guy. We had a very nice conversation. I like him very much. All these things are the exact opposite we heard about Trudeau. Like, Trudeau was afraid to go to the White House.
Well, Tommy Temper says Trump calling out Trudeau and Freeland was glorious. I mean, he used part of the meeting, if you didn't watch the whole thing, to attack the two of them. Basically said to Mark Carney, I didn't like his predecessor. He didn't like Trudeau. He says he called him governor again. Singled out Chrystia Freeland, quote, she was terrible. He says, actually, she was a terrible person, and she really hurt the deal very badly because she tried to take advantage of the deal, and she didn't get away with it. So bad blood remains there, to say the very least. Kenzie says Trump presented his non-negotiables, he says we don't want anything from Canada. What did Mark Carney say to counteract that? I mean, I would just say very simply that Americans realize that they do need things from Canada, and that actually is not, and he did say that. Trump basically says we barely get anything, we barely participate in any trade with Canada, and Carney says we're your biggest customer. But it was not in an adversarial way. I had a conversation with a friend over the weekend, and a friend of mine, and she would not want to be identified, but she was telling me about a situation she's in. She works for a very significant multi-billion-dollar international media corporation based out of Canada. And she told me about a scathing email that she and her department received from the corporate vice president in charge of what they do in the business. And in the email, this scathing, flamethrower-esque email, this VP referred to them, her team, as nincompoops. And I said, well, what did you do about it? And she said, well, absolutely nothing. She says we were compliant, even though this person, in her words, makes $5 million a year and none of us can stand working for him, because what other choice did we have? And there are certain scenarios. I know some people would love to stand up and take a dump on the desk and walk out, but not everybody can do that. No. And the Canadian delegation, over the next number of years, led by the Prime Minister and others, Canada's ambassador to the United States, Minister of Foreign Affairs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there is going to have to be a certain adjustment to the approach in dealing with the president, and we saw that yesterday from Mark Carney. I think regardless of your politics, I understand some of you that are watching or listening to the show right now cannot stand the fact that it's Mark Carney and not Pierre Poilievre down there talking
well, I
to
think
him.
That's
but
what
the fact of the matter is right now, we're looking out for Canada.
Yeah.
Right now, we're talking about Canada, and Carney's the guy.
And I'm not saying all our problems are solved, hurrah, hurrah, backflip. I'm not putting on a Carney shirt. What I'm saying is, first meeting, win. And when, like, the other thing is, like, you got to be calm, man. You got to be the reserved one. You got to be thinking, like, yes, the best part of what you just mentioned of that meeting is when, Trump says Canada's not our biggest client. We don't need their cars. We don't need anything. It
says we barely do anything with them.
We barely have anything. And then, Carney comes in and says, well, we are your largest, trader, blah, 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 et cetera. But Carney already knows in the back of his head, social media is going to take care of this for him. And you see it today. The memes of this video, as Trump is talking, people are throwing up stats and throwing up graphs of just how we interact with them economically, and how still to this day, as these tariffs are looming, they're buying auto parts and cars from us still.
Of course.
So what the fuck are you talking about, Donald? Carney knows that. He's smart. Lay in the cut, stroke the ego, fact check when it's way out there, and let the internet do its thing after.
All right. May the 8th and June the 6th are big days for Canadians. They're big days in the history of the free world. And the Juno Beach Centre and the Juno Beach Centre Association have just launched a new initiative that we absolutely must talk about as we approach the 80th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome the executive director of the Juno Beach Centre, Alex Fitzgerald Black, to the program to talk about this. Alex, welcome to the show. Thanks for making time for us. Where's your head and your heart at on the eve of the 80th anniversary of VE Day?
Geez, that's an overwhelming question right now, I would say, Ryan. This entire last weekend has been just an outpouring of gratitude, especially in the Netherlands, with a series of ceremonies and commemorations happening in the Netherlands to honor the over 7,600 Canadians who lost their lives and they were buried in cemeteries over there to finish the Second World War and bring freedom to the Dutch. And it's always so heartwarming, just because they truly show the Dutch people that they will never forget what that sacrifice means to their society and to their freedom.
This is, I know, a monumental year. You're talking about the 80th anniversary, but I have to imagine one of those reasons is, and this always feels awkward to say out loud, but we're approaching a time in history where the veterans that so bravely and proudly served our country and preserved freedom and democracy around the world are becoming fewer and fewer, and the opportunity to hear firsthand from these veterans are becoming more and more precious.
Absolutely. I mean, I was at a ceremony at Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto yesterday, and there were probably about 20 veterans in wheelchairs. Now, those weren't all Second World War veterans. Maybe about 10 of them were Second World War veterans. And I was quite, pleasantly surprised to see that number turn out for that ceremony, which was at a hospital that was established in the wake of the Second World War to support veterans. I think the last I saw and read, there are only maybe about 1,500 Canadian Second World War veterans still left alive, which is an amazing statistic when you consider that there were over 1 million veterans when the war ended. So we're very much getting closer and closer, perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years, to when we'll be saying goodbye to the last members of that generation.
Do you feel, I mean, the work that the Juno Beach Centre does is absolutely remarkable in recognizing and celebrating the sacrifice made by brave Canadian soldiers and preserving those memories on such significant real estate. What's your assessment? People can, by the way, always check out junobeach.org if they want to learn more. Johnny, for our YouTube audience, is showing us some of the images right now. But what's your assessment of where the average Canadian is at in their awareness and their understanding of the significance of both Victory in Europe Day and the anniversary of D-Day as well?
I think we've, for a long time, had a bit of a mixed history of how we've remembered the Second World War. I think there was a surge in remembrance starting in the 90s. This is, the era in which a lot of the veterans were now retired, even the youngest among them. And they were going back to places like Normandy in the Netherlands and being welcomed, kind of like rock stars, so, these liberators. And that's part of the wave that helped get the Juno Beach Centre built in the first place. Our museum opened in 2003. I think we've done a better job as well in recent, decades, the last couple of decades of remembering the Second World War, and the Juno Beach Centre has been an important part of that. But there's still a lot more to be done. And as you say, with the living memory of those veterans passing on, it's more important than ever for us to continue this work and to raise awareness about what Canada did during the Second World War. Arguably, the liberation of the Netherlands and the end of the war was Canada's finest hour, and our coming out party on the world stage, maybe. And so it's, especially at times like these where, freedom and democracy in the world are threatened and where we're having difficulties with our American allies to the south. It's important to kind of look inwardly at those moments and look at what we accomplished as a nation and take solace in the fact that, with the same grittiness and determination, we can do great things again.
The second that I heard about your team's campaign, this postcard campaign, he lived where you lived, or he lived where you live. I knew that we had to get you on the show. Your team at the Juno Beach Centre Foundation sent out 1,945 unique postcards. Can you tell us about this campaign that would have reached the mailboxes of about 2,000 Canadian homes?
Yeah, so this is the third time we're running this sort of campaign. We did some smaller variations on it for the 75th anniversary of D-Day and for the 80th anniversary of the Dieppe raid. There were about 400 postcards involved in each of those campaigns. And this one, we really ramped things up to almost 2,000, choosing the 1945 number as a significant, milestone date to match. And basically, we've sent postcards to the addresses from where Canadians who signed up to serve overseas in the Second World War came from. And so these are all Canadians who perished during the Second World War, who are buried mostly overseas, actually almost entirely, I would say, overseas in Europe, in Italy, in the Netherlands, in France, and in the United Kingdom. They've been sent to communities across the country, so from coast to coast. So all 10 provinces, including Newfoundland, is covered by this campaign. And we're just really hoping to raise awareness about the 80th anniversary of D-Day, to remember the Canadian sacrifice for freedom and democracy 80 years ago, but also to connect Canadians with local stories from their own communities so that they can, learn a little bit more about what people from their community did in this great, crusade, if you will, to defeat Nazi Germany and the Second World War in Europe.
I heard that at least one of the postcards sent to an address in our home city of Edmonton was for Trooper William Charles Anderson. Do you happen to have any background on this soldier?
I sure do. And the great thing about the postcards is on the back, they have a QR code, and that takes you to a page on our website that gives people the instructions for how they can go and do this research themselves. All these service files are available online through Library and Archives Canada. In Trooper Anderson's case, he was born in Manville, Alberta on October 27th, 1923, but he grew up in Edmonton, and he enlisted from an Edmonton address. He was in school until 17. He worked as a plumber at Wedstone Plumbing, a local plumbing company. He enlisted on March 22nd, 1943. He was 19 years old. He was 5 foot 7.5 inches, weighed 147 pounds, had brown hair and blue eyes. As the eldest son, he felt it was his duty to enlist. He had six siblings. There's 7 total in the family. And his brother George, also a younger brother, later enlisted. But he felt that Bill Anderson felt it was his duty because he was the oldest of the brothers. He became a gunner operator qualified at Camp Borden in Ontario in 1943, and then was shipped overseas in November 43 to England. He was assigned to the Sherbrooke Fusiliers Regiment, so actually a regiment based in Quebec. They were a tank unit, and they landed on June 6, 1944 on D-Day, and he was with them. In August of 44, at the end of the Battle of Normandy, he actually got hit by a truck, and he had a badly bruised ankle as a result of that. Went back to the UK, was in hospital for a couple of weeks, and then he was sent back to the front again. And we can fast forward all the way till April 1945. The Canadian Army has just done some major operations invading Germany, and they're now moving north from Germany back into the Netherlands. And on April 2nd, 1945, he and his tank crew were supporting operations to liberate the town of Wehl in the Netherlands, Wehl. And their tank was hit by a German artillery shell and destroyed. Trooper Anderson was killed along with two other crew members. So 3 crew members perished and 2 managed to survive. Today, he's buried and honored at Groesbeek Canadian War Cemetery in the Netherlands. So, that's the sort of thing the service file can do. It can really illuminate the life of that individual, and we can speak a little bit to, what his life meant and some of the details behind his experience.
It's remarkable. You try to wrap your mind around the numbers. Over 45,000 Canadians giving their lives through that war in the fight for a better world, and then you see a campaign like this, or what you're doing right now, talking to us about one individual. This is one person who had parents that cared about them, siblings or best friends, or in some cases, young children, these brave young Canadians. I try to wrap my mind around it, some of them lying about their ages so they could go serve their country. 16. I mean, we had Marty Jones, a 99-year-old D-Day veteran, in here for a very special episode that we released on Remembrance Day on November 11th. He's talking to us about being a teenager, too young to receive his rum ration. So he was in charge of keeping all the boys behaving while they were out on the town. But these are young, 19, 20, 21 years of age. And I think back to where I was at that age, and it's just almost impossible to fathom this campaign of reaching these 1,900 plus addresses and talking about the specific people. I mean, we live in a heritage home. I won't go on too long with my insights here, but the home is 110 years old. And my wife and I have often wondered, when our hand is on the railing going up the stairs, or when the heels of our shoes click on that hardwood floor, was there a tearful goodbye? Was there an emotional reunion post-war, potentially in that same space where we walk those same halls? I mean, what a powerful way to remind Canadians 80 years later what this sacrifice truly entailed.
Absolutely. And the response we received through this campaign is just incredible. And I can give you one example that relates to the story that you were just alluding to. So we got a response from a gentleman named Joe in Windsor, Ontario. And he got a postcard at his address. And he followed the QR code and looked up more information about the individual who lost his life. And it turned out that that veteran, or that casualty, I suppose in this case, had a personal connection with him. It turns out that the uncle of the individual who had passed was actually this person's high school football coach.
Whoa!
And this uncle was also a second father to the person who owned the home, to Joe in Windsor. And amazingly, when he was doing the research and discovered in the documents that the veteran and the casualty in this case was a very heavy smoker. And when he and his wife purchased the home 25 years ago, they did some renovations. And during that time, they actually discovered items from the past, including a bank book, a newspaper, and an empty pack of Parliament-branded cigarettes, which dated to the 1940s. So it's possible they found cigarettes that the casualty smoked himself before he went off to war. And so he's now sharing this incredible story with his friends and family. And that's ultimately the goal of the campaign, is to get people to think about these connections and to see what connections exist out there, and to get people to, sit back and take a moment, this June 6th, perhaps, or, May 8th, tomorrow, just to remember the sacrifice that went into creating the world that I will say right now is perhaps under threat a little bit in terms of the peace that was established in 1945.
I think that's a very fair and important observation that you make. I just want to let you know this is resonating with our audience. I'm not surprised in the least. Shirley's in our live chat right now, says she's off to Juno Beach next week. Shirley says, I'm so looking forward to this as my father-in-law was injured there. Alberta Rancher says, I would love to visit Normandy before I'm done here on Earth. Just to be there to say thank you for my freedom. How incredible is that? Glenna says, when the call came, Canadians stepped up, and we remember. Gizmo says, my great uncle landed at Juno Beach on D-Day and then remained for 2 years after the war, removing landmines. Steph says, I'd love to go to Normandy. My grandpa was captured right off the boat at Dieppe. I've read his letters to my grandma, and it is so emotional. This is powerful stuff.
Absolutely. So many great stories and little tidbits in there. I mean, the folks that were captured at Dieppe, of course, they were, in captivity for, over 2 years, 2.5 years. And they were experiencing freedom at this point in the war as well, right? A lot of them were on forced marches to get away, from the Russians, the Soviets on the Eastern Front, moving back into, Germany proper as we know it today. And many of them were liberated, not as many by Canadians, because the Canadians tended to be in the north part of Germany and in the Netherlands, but, by Americans and British troops. And then they were quickly, sent back to England and sent home. They were among the first wave of Canadians who were able to return the prisoners of war.
I just want to keep reading these to honor the sacrifice of these veterans. Tracy says, we forget how hard it was to get information back then. My great uncle was MIA for a long time. The family didn't learn all the details until the early 2000s, long after all of his siblings had died. Miss Katie says, even post-war, a lot of men were enlisting underage. My dad was one of them. He was drafted by the Toronto Millionaires, a pro junior league, a feeder team to the Maple Leafs at the time, but instead he enlisted at 17 years of age. Emily says, my great uncle in the British Armed Forces, one of the first Allied soldiers into Bergen-Belsen. It destroyed him for a number of years. That's such an important thing to recognize, is this trauma that remained for many, many years. Noob Try Again says, I am a first-generation Canadian. My parents both immigrated from Holland when they were young. Says they retired in the Netherlands a few years back. I hope to visit Juno Beach someday. Tracy says, my mother's uncle was shot down in his Royal Canadian Air Force Canada-British unit over Normandy. All perished, and there's a memorial erected in the town. Is it Lara? Says paid for out of pocket by the mayor as a thanks to Canadians. Alex, for people who don't know, the Juno Beach Centre it's Canada's second World War museum, and it's a cultural centre that's located in Normandy, France. Can you talk a bit about, I know that there have been some wins with the Juno Beach Centre, but there's also some work to be done on securing its healthy future. People can check out junobeach.org. They can learn more, book a tour, or even make a donation if they feel compelled. Just some insights from you on why it's so important and what the future of the Juno Beach Centre looks like.
I think I go back a couple of years now to 2022 when there was the condo development that was happening next door to the Juno Beach Centre. And frankly, that development, if it had taken place, would have strangled us to death over the course of a number of years. Thankfully, of course, the Canadian and French government stepped up, and Canadians stepped up, something like 85,000 letters written to MPs and to French officials to help us alleviate this. And ultimately now the land is under our control and we have some big plans for it. We have a commemorative park that we're hoping to build out. And we're also working on a D-Day monument with the names of the almost 400 Canadians who lost their lives on D-Day on June 6, 1944, to make sure we permanently honor them. In fact, there's plenty of, smaller D-Day and related monuments across Juno Beach, but there's not one that actually brings together all those names in one place. So we're very excited about that prospect.
Alex, congratulations. I mean, I could spend all day reading comments here. People are blown away by the postcard campaign. I think it's absolutely brilliant. As soon as we heard about it, we reached out to you because I wanted to make sure that more people are aware of the work that's being done by the Juno Beach Centre Association and at the Juno Beach Centre. Again, people can check out junobeach.org tomorrow as we reflect on the 80th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day. Of course, that's on the 8th of May. And as we look ahead to June 6th. Thanks so much for making time for us, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you, Ryan. It's my pleasure today. Thanks.
You got it. That's the executive director of the Juno Beach Centre Association, Alex Fitzgerald Black. Man, Johnny, these comments here on the live chat. It's M. Aitken says, my mom and dad married on May the 8th of 1953. So, about 8 years or so, coming up on the 10-year anniversary of that war ending. Says it was such an important date in my dad's life, the 8th of May. He enlisted when he was 16 into the Royal Canadian Air Force. I mean, the significance of Victory in Europe Day is essentially when German troops surrendered. Many of you now just talking about how you've sort of seen a spurring of interest in World War II history as you've become older. And how about this from Dubious? Dubious points out that they've got me beat. They say that the building that they live in was built in 1902. Ours built in 1913. But there's something about being in a heritage home, like the creaks and the floors. Just that feeling of all of the history, the families that have come and gone, the joys, the highs, the lows, and a big shout out to the Juno Beach Centre for the work that they've done in preserving that legacy and ensuring that Canadians are aware of it. Every week, courtesy of our friends at Tourism Jasper, we have a chance to step outside the news cycle and to celebrate, to recognize, and quite frankly, to enjoy the memories that lie in wait in this crown jewel of the Canadian Rockies. It's MyJasper Memories, presented by our friends at Tourism Jasper. We're always asking you to send in your photos, to tell us about your trips to Jasper, and that is exactly what Chad's family did. Chad sent us an email after his family returned from Jasper National Park. It was a big one for Chad's wife, Lisa, who is out there running the Jasper Half Marathon. Chad says, if you cannot be at an Oilers game during the playoffs, you can do much worse than to be out in Jasper, the heart of the magnificent Canadian Rockies. Says this was the second year of running the Jasper Half Marathon for our families. Lisa's turn to run, says Chad. Says, I spent the day running through the town, enjoying the town with our boys, touring Jasper's many family-friendly activities. Says this included the off-leash dog park and the many playgrounds, restaurants, and shops. Chad says, although it was heart-wrenching to see the impacts of that devastating fire last year, it was simultaneously heartwarming to see that even a raging forest fire could not diminish the incredible positive energy that is Jasper. Says, I recommend that everybody go to Jasper to reconnect with nature and see what Canadian resilience looks like. We have much to be proud of. Chad says, I can't wait for next year when it's my turn to run again. I get to run around that stunning Lac Beauvert and through the Jasper Park Lodge grounds. Chad, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We love it. You can send us your Jasper memories anytime to talk@ryanjespersen.com. I want to let you know this time of year is a big one if you're looking to get out onto the Athabasca River. Rafting season is officially open in Jasper National Park. Whether you're a thrill seeker or a nature lover, there's an experience and an adventure waiting for everybody. We're talking world-class whitewater rafting and amazing scenery as you paddle through glacial rivers. And there's options for every level as well, from gentle float tours on the Athabasca River. Everybody from age 3 to whatever, 99 or older can hop aboard, and leash dogs are actually welcome on the rafts, which is super cool. You can check out, just the real chill, slow flow of the river all the way up to thrilling rapids if you're one of those adventure seekers. There's a very good chance that you're going to spot wildlife along the riverbanks. And of course, these rafts run, rain, or shine. So it's great for families, it's great for couples and groups looking to explore Jasper in an exciting way. You can learn more details on rafting adventures that lie in wait in Jasper National Park by checking out jasper.travel or just Google rafting in Jasper. MyJasper Memories is presented weekly on Real Talk by our good friends at Tourism Jasper. Big episode on the show coming up on the 8th of May. As we told you, we're going to introduce you to the 3 finalists for the Edmonton Film Prize. This part of our partnership with Northwest Film Fest, and that's one you're not going to want to miss. But out of the gates, as we wrap today, I want to make sure you're aware, 8:30 live, Mountain Time, 10:30 Eastern, or later on demand on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Alberta's Premier will be joining me live in studio. Danielle Smith taking your questions and mine on flirting with a referendum on Alberta's future in Canada. If you missed Grand Chief Greg Desjardins on the show yesterday, May 6th, talking about it, make sure you check it out ahead of time. Talk soon.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jespersen, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harmon Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjespersen.com.